I'm Sophia. Hi. And I've been doing Commedia for a long, long, long time, and I love it. It is so much fun. It's just the thing that literally gets me up in the morning. and I'm located in North Carolina, in the magnificent kingdom of Atlantia. So let me get started by saying we're going to start at the very beginning and talk about a little bit of history and how Commedia fits into the world, and then the pieces that make Commedia. So Commedia is a style of putting on a play that was particularly popular in the mid to late 1600s. And it is a comedy style. There are parts of it that that could be played in something other than comedy, but it was intended to be comedy. The people who did it were known as the Italian comedians throughout Europe. They toured all throughout Europe, even England, and during the last half of the 1600s, in particularly getting into about 1620, that was the golden age of Commedia. And so Commedia dell'Arte, directly translated, as far as I know, and please, if you know Italian, correct me, but as far as I have understood, the direct translation of Commedia dell'Arte is comedy of the profession. And the idea is that is the first time in history that people could take this art and make a living at it, including women. So it was a profession for the first time during this time period. You could spend your whole life doing this and making money to feed your stomach and other people's stomachs if you had, a family of stomachs. And the inclusion of women was about the shockingness of women being presented on the theater. And you might think it was, rule breaking and taboo breaking, and it was, but it made money. The whole idea is it was about making money through performances. And this was during a time in the Italian Renaissance when people were thinking more about individuals as humans than just sort of pawns in a religious storytelling. So the theater and performing arts were often in the venue of the church at that time. And this was a time when that was going away. It never completely disappeared, but theater and performing arts were mostly about getting across Bible stories and teaching religious stories to people. There was a lot of illiteracy out there at the time. So being able to present these stories that the church wanted to teach people was often done through performing arts. So now, oh, hey, I've got my Italian helper here. Correct translation would be comedy of art, okay? Or better, comedy as art, modern interpretation. Hey, thank you. That's very helpful. I love that. The idea that this was the first time people could take all of their time and just focus it on this art in order to make the money to then feed themselves is the key piece that launched it into something that a lot of people did. And at first it started in about 1545 is the date that we have a contract we can look at that said, as of this date, this particular group of people made a contract amongst themselves to become a troupe. And they did it on a yearly basis. They would re-up after a year. And they had a very specific set of expectations, including eating and singing and gaming together. So they created a troupe that functioned together, and their purpose was to make money so they could eat and survive and do it with this kind of art. So troops is how it happened. And that's one of the things I love about Commedia. I love the group aspect where everyone brings their own particular piece of talent and brings it to the group and makes something more than the sum of your parts. So with this troupe, you've got a group of people, all of which are going to play a particular part. Most of them were able to play many parts, but had a specialty and would end up playing that special part for most of their lives. We're going to talk about those parts in terms of the stock characters. So for those of you who were wondering, why are we joking about somebody's cat being named Arlaquino and Columbina? That is because Arlaquino and Columbina are some of the stock characters that you see a lot in Commedia. Now, this is something that changed over time, over hundreds of years, but you could count on a certain core group of characters showing up in any kind of Commedia play. And here's my Copernicus over here. This is Copernicus, so you'll get to see him. So the characters are part of what makes Commedia Commedia. And we're going to get to some of the other pieces here in a minute. One of the ways I highly recommend learning about these characters is with this book. This book is the one I'm going to recommend everybody get. I actually have a couple of others here, but this one is a really great book to start with. It's by Barry Grantham, called Playing Commedia. And this has a really lovely summary of all of the characters. I shouldn't say all because it's art and you never really know if you've got absolutely all of them, but a very good comprehensive list of each of the characters right here in the book. So I highly recommend this book, and it's going to be in the materials that I'm going to put in the chat box here in a minute. So Barry Grantham, by the way, is English, and he's an amazing Commedia professional. He's about 80 years old right now, and he's still performing and teaching. I got to take a wonderful class from him last year at the Calamy School and in Oxford, and that's an annual thing. And if you guys are in, if you get to travel to or in or near Oxford, England, at any time, then you will be able to go to the school in the spring. They hold it. It's a week-long thing during Easter time. And so, oh yeah, Panto is wonderful fun, I gotta say. In the chat box, they're mentioning Panto. Panto is one of many distant cousins of Commedia. The style is absolutely the kind of thing in Commedia where you would have audience members talking back to the cast and really extreme, silly comedy happening. So I love Panto, super fun. So let's talk about these characters. They represented for the first time in this developing of performing arts. They represented what we might say nowadays as archetypes, but common people, common kinds of people that were not just people in Bible stories. They weren't the nobility and royalty and high-ranking people that were often written about. These were regular, everyday people, and that's one of the things that made Commedia so capable of making money. It was performed in marketplaces and everywhere else, but when it was performed in marketplaces where regular, everyday people were out there shopping and getting their business done day to day, they would see in the performance the kinds of people that were them, that they could relate to. So they did have a little bit of a hierarchy within these characters. And we're going to start at the top and work our way down. So at the top of this hierarchy is Pantalone. He is the father of a family. He is also most often a merchant that is rich and has made his money. He has spent his life working hard and making money through his merchanting to support his family. And he has been there, done that. He's done a lot of things in his life. He has not been taken care of. He has done the taking care. And so Pantalone is also often portrayed as very selfish and wanting to hold on to his money, and often motivated by keeping his money. And if he has children in the show, usually they're a young male or female who is of marriageable age, and he wants that marriage to be financially profitable. So Pantalone often gets a bad rap, I think, also in my view, that a lot of people just play him as kind of an Ebenezer Scrooge, nasty old man. He doesn't have to be, but he definitely is somebody who has worked hard, become rich, and wants to keep it. So he also does often care about his family. His children are often part of a plot in the show. And when push comes to shove, he cares about his family, he cares about his friends, but he believes that money is the way to happiness. So Pantalone is a rich old man and often portrayed as rather selfish, and money is the way to do it. So that's Pantalone. He has a friend of equal status, and I should say frenemy. He could be either his friend or his enemy. And the idea of Dottore is that he has not worked hard to get where he's at. He has been taken care of by somebody else, most likely his parents. However, he is dedicated to education and knowledge. He believes knowledge is, oh yes, Balthazar, there are certain looks that distinguish the characters. I will definitely get to those. Dottore has intellect as his most precious thing. In fact, getting Pantalone and Dottore to argue about which is more important, knowledge or money, is a really great character exercise. So Dottore believes that knowledge is the most important thing, but he actually doesn't have a lot. He is like those professors I'm sure you've all had at some point or another who have spoken many words and not yet actually communicated very much. So you could portray him as someone who pontificates a lot and says a lot of things and sounds like those are very important words, really long words, and sounds kind of, ancient. But everybody still believes him and still believes that he's the smartest man wherever he is. So I tell you what, well, since let's see, somebody said, okay, Balthazar was saying other certain looks that distinguish the characters. I'm going to go ahead and dive into the masks while we're talking about the characters. The look of the characters had a few common themes, and one of the methods that Commedia used to get across the fact that this was a particular character are masks. So of the things that make Commedia, one is the portrayal of this particular set of stock characters, and one other is these masks. So I have a few masks here, and this is one for Pantalone. So I'm going to leave him up here. And those of you with the wonderful ability to get down to Italy, you can find these masks in a lot of tourist shops. There are actually two shops I would recommend, one in Venice and one in Florence, that are magnificent mask shops. This one came from the one in Venice. And then I have another one I can show you that came from the one in Florence. But these are from really talented mask makers that know Commedia. And so you could actually get these. These are a little expensive, about €200 a piece. But when it comes to something that will help you do your art forever and ever, this is the kind of investment that you could make. So Pantalone, he has a big, huge hooked nose, and he's usually frowning and looking kind of nasty. So there is your Pantalone. Dottore is quite a bit different. It is an epic schnoz, isn't it? In fact, the schnoz is often the way that you can identify the difference between each character. But if you thought that was a schnoz, here we have the Dottore. This is your Dottore. Again, a very big nose, but he doesn't have cheeks. It's just eyebrows and a nose. And sometimes you'll see big fluffy eyebrows out. And so they would make his cheeks red. They would actually paint his cheeks red. So that's your Dottore. Now, that's the top level of hierarchy in these characters. Dottore and Pantalone were referred to as vecchi. They're the two old guys. They are the most powerful in the play. Unless, of course, you have someone like a prince or a king or the doge come in as kind of a last-minute save at the end. So, let's see. The next down in hierarchy is actually their children. Their children are going to be the love interests. The love interests in the play. So they are going to have many different names. There are some names that are consistent in some of the scenarios we have from back in history. So we often will hear common names used, but they're really just Italian names for people. So a male lover could be named Orazio or Flavio. Those are common names. And a female lover could be named Isabella or Flaminia. And the good news is you can use any Italian names however you wish. These are just common ones. So the children of the vecchi, the two old men, will often be people for whom the plot revolves. The adventures of the young lovers trying to get together will often drive whatever the plot is talking about. And at the end, they will always get together, get married, live happily ever after. And the resolution to these plays is almost always happiness and joy. And that means a man and a woman getting married. You and I know there are plenty of variations on that theme for getting married and being happy. However, in the 1600s, that's what made a lot of people happy. So the lovers did not wear masks. So as I said before, this is the first time when women were incorporated into performing arts, and the women were not masked on purpose because their beauty being strut about to the stage is an important part of bringing people in because of the shock value at that time and getting those people to pay money, either by voluntarily putting it in a hat as a hat was passed around, or standing still long enough for somebody, some urchin from the troupe to go around and pickpockets. Any way that money could be gotten from the audience, it was all good. So we have the fathers and we have their children. The next layer down is the servants. And this is a huge area of creativity. There are many, many different kinds of servants. Those servants are going to be the runners of the plot. They're going to be the ones actually doing things and making things crazy and either succeeding or failing to help the lovers or support the fathers. So servants can fall into categories of good and bad. They're loyal and want to serve their masters, or they are independent and selfish and want to serve themselves and get out from being a servant. They can also be smart and not smart. And not smart, I would say, is simply an easy way of putting it. There are all sorts of ways that you could portray a character as being unsuccessful but funny. And Arlaquino is our best example of this. So as somebody was mentioning, their cat is named Arlaquino. And Arlaquino is one of the most famous commedia characters ever that also lasted for hundreds of years after that. Derivatives of Arlaquino are seen everywhere. You may see Harlequin type characters in French ballet shortly in the 1700s and in all sorts of other places. So the Arlaquino character is a positive, well-meaning character and also unsuccessful. You could call him stupid, but he's also extremely well-meaning. So he is a positive character, but not successful at doing whatever he is trying to do. There's also the other side of the balance, which is a bad intended servant that could be stupid or successful. And my best example of that is Brigella. Brigella is known to be a con man. He's often successful, but will often also get will be given his due at the end of the play. And he is often trying to get out of being a servant, somehow get enough money in order to get out of his particular lifestyle. So Brigella, being nasty but successful, is kind of the balance for Arlaquino, being well-meaning and loyal, but stupid and unsuccessful. And these are also men. There is a whole other section of commedia servants who are women. Now, these women are my particular favorite because this is a section where these kinds of women servants could derive the plot. They could be very smart, or they could be not smart and sort of suffer the consequences of what's going on in the plot. But they were always a piece of what drove commedia to be relatable to the audience. And the women, again, are unmasked, and they were what brought the audience members in to see the play. So some names for these men and women servants. Arlaquino and Brigella are, again, the men. The women servants, you can also call them servetta. Franceschina is a common one. Olivetta is another common one. And the kitty cat that has the adorable name of Columbina, that's another good one. Columbina is a female servant's name, but she is also post-SCA period. She actually showed up after 1600 and about 1650s. But she's awesome because she is sassy, and she was played as successful and smart and able to get her master or mistress what they needed. So that kind of supportive and yet smart character is always a joy when you are relying on them. So let's take a look at a couple of more masks. Let's see where Arlaquino are lovable and very positive male servant. That is this guy. So this is a mask that shows the elements of Arlaquino very, very well. So you can see his nose. His nose is a little button nose. Sometimes it's been portrayed as kind of a piggy nose that goes up a little bit. And he's got big round cheeks. He's got what do you call it? Eyebrows. Eyebrows that are going to be up and big and curious, but not often big and fluffy like the old men. Sometimes they'll put like bunny fur on the old men eyebrows. Not so much on Arlaquino. Every once in a while, you might see a mustache on Arlaquino. You could do that. But one of the key pieces that makes Arlaquino Arlaquino is this guy right here, and that's the carbuncle on his forehead because he's klutzy. So nearly every picture I've seen of an extant mask from hundreds of years ago has this guy on it, the carbuncle. It's a little red. You can't really see it too well on my screen, but it's usually painted red and positioned on the forehead somewhere. So Arlaquino is well-meaning, but he's a klutz, and he's absolutely going to fail at whatever you give him. So if Isabella says, Arlaquino, I need you to bring this letter to my lover, Orazio, and be sure to get it to him, you can be guaranteed that in the next following few scenes, Arlaquino is not going to succeed at getting that letter to Orazio. He might eat it. He might find it interesting to play with. He might give it to Brigella. He might give it to somebody else. There's a number of things that he could do, but he's not going to get it to Orazio. So that is Arlaquino, and let's see if I have the Brigella. Okay, here is a Briguela mask. Now, Brigella, oh wait, no, this is Pantalone. Where's the Brigella? Brigella is not quite so well defined in the masks because there we go. He was just kind of nasty. So here is a Brigella mask. He's looking kind of evil. And he does not have a particularly definitive nose or eyebrows, but he does look kind of mean. So Brigella actually came around after SCA period as a more defined character, but within SCA period, you could easily use the name Brigella for a servant that is a little bit nasty. So there is another layer of characters that I want to mention that fit kind of in the middle of the social hierarchy, but they are undefined wild cards. So the first one I'm going to mention is the woman. We call her in general La Signora. This is going to be usually a widow, an older woman, someone who is independent and on her own. She might own a brothel. She might own a business of some kind. Sometimes she might be the widow of Pantalone if he's not showing up in the play. There are times when La Signora just, comes up and her role in the play is to help along the plot. Maybe she has, a business in which the plot takes place. But she is very often free to define for whatever the plot in the story needs. Now, also at the same level, also kind of a wild card for whatever the plot needs, is our famous captain. The captain is a magnificent character that is a favorite for centuries because he is the man who is not from here. He is often portrayed as Spanish, but that's because there was a particularly famous, well done, amazing portrayal of the captain as Spanish by one of the most famous commedia troupes ever. The troupe was named I Gelosi. The man who portrayed him was Francesco Andrini. And what you saw here is a man really using art as part of life, because Francesco was captured by the Spanish and put into jail as a prisoner of war for about 3 years. And he came out of that to come home to his lovely wife, Isabella, and continue to run the troupe, I Gelosi, and do Commedia for many, many years. And he used his Commedia art to heal from being captured by the Spanish. So he took this character of Capitano and made it Spanish and made it somebody you could really make fun of. So the captain is supposed to be a few things, not necessarily Spanish, but definitely not from around here. He's a foreigner. Wherever your play takes place, he is from somewhere else, and he has come into town. He also is a soldier of some kind, soldier or sailor, and someone who has claimed to be in the military and claimed to have great military conquests and successes and a long resume of things that he has done that would require skill and bravery. But he's actually lying. He lies about it. He has not actually done these great things, and he's actually a coward. So he is bombastic, brags about himself and his great, amazing conquests, and yet doesn't actually have anything to back it up. So I'm sure all of us have known somebody like this that brags a lot and doesn't have anything to back it up. And Capitano is going to be like that. So one of the common, very, very common names attached to the captain is Spavento. So Capitano Spavento is a common name that you're going to see in another book here that I'm going to point out. This one is a book I highly recommend you give a try. Let's see if I can get on the screen. Here we go. This is Scenarios of the Commedia dell'Arte, translated by Henry Salerno. All of these are, it's about 50 scenarios written down by a guy named Flaminio Scala. Now, Scala is a man who was an actor and a director of commedia. Back in the day, he ended somewhere around 1920-ish. So in the decades leading up to his book being published in 1611, Flaminio Scala worked with I Gelosi, and in this book are scenarios that we more or less attribute to I Gelosi, but it's also very much Scala's memories of the best scenarios that he ever did. All right, super, 10 minutes left. So this is a book I highly recommend you get. The scenarios in here are the ones that we have from back then. And in these scenarios, you will find Capitano Spavento. So I'd like to move on. I'm sorry, I'm really squishing all the rest of this in here. There are some other books that I want to make sure you know about, and they are published by the SCA. The SCA Inc. has a publishing branch, a research and publishing branch called The Complete Anachronist. And then here are two books written on commedia, published by The Complete Anachronist. And you'll see this one, there's my name. I wrote this with a handful of friends. And then this one was written by Dina Turnello, an amazing woman. Her SCA name is Mistress Lucetta Di Cosimo. She's an amazing research laurel, and commedia is one of her big passions. And these two are Complete Anachronist number 172 and 173. And so they were written to give you, folks who are especially in the SCA and just starting out, a great compilation of everything that we've talked about today and more, and also the best bibliographies you're ever going to find, especially for SCA period research. So I highly recommend that you get to sca.org, look for The Complete Anachronist, and then you can order these. They're very, very cheap. They're like $4.50 a piece, and I think you don't even pay for shipping. So the SCA Inc. has these, and they have everything that you need for remembering stuff that we've talked about today, and then also just loads more. So we've reviewed the characters, and you've seen some of the masks. The costuming for each of the characters is more or less the styles and fashions of 16th century Italy. I mean, the 1600s in Italy. So the lovers, the men and women, are just going to wear fashions of the age. The servants are going to wear mostly plain working level, working class clothes. Arlaquino is particularly dressed in patches. regular working class clothes, but really kind of torn apart with lots and lots of patches because he's very, very poor and he doesn't do a very good job. So, and then also Pantalone is often portrayed in red, doesn't have to be, but noble men's clothing in red is common for him. And Dottore is often portrayed as an academic with academic robes. So in those complete anachronists, there's a lot of information on costuming. And if you want to get into actually producing commedia in the SCA especially, I highly suggest you take a look at those books for costuming and also some staging ideas and things that you can do to actually bring commedia to life. Now, the last thing I'm going to talk about is the scenarios. Now, you might imagine every play has a script, but in Commedia, they had a different way of creating their stories. They would create a story with an outline of basically what happened. Pantalone would have a daughter named Isabella. Dottore would have a son named Orazio. Dottore and Pantalone were interested in making matches of their children's, making matches for their children to get married, but Isabella and Orazio love each other and want to run away and get married. So this is your basic little thin outline. And going forward, the actors would improvise how they portrayed the scene, and each scene would build upon itself and become a scenario. But improvisation is how they actually portrayed their lines. So where Shakespeare and Moliere and great playwrights gave us exact lines to recite and memorize, Commedia is based on improvising your lines, making up a story about real people doing real things. And then every time you put on that play, it's going to be a little bit different. One of the reasons why this became important is because these actors would travel around Italy, and it wasn't even known as Italy back then. It was a bunch of different city-states. They all had different languages. So they didn't have the same Italian that was, relatively the same throughout the different areas. They would have to use everything under their control to get more out of every single location they played at. And so being able to adjust what they were saying for the local area really made a difference in their ability to communicate with the audience. So being flexible and finding ways to work in local news and local people's names, and staying flexible to allow the story to sort of evolve and be custom for the place that they were playing, is what allowed them to travel a lot and get a lot of use out of the same work that they had done. So the scenarios are an outline of scenes where you as the actor can improvise whatever you want to do within that scene. So those are the things, and we're just coming up to the end of the time. Those are the things that make Commedia Commedia. And I actually have a website that I'm going to type into the chat here, eferenzi.com. This is the website, eferenzi.com, is the website for my current troupe. And, we still have been doing some stuff during quarantine. We made a little play called Keep Your Distance. That is recorded. So you can see us having fun in somebody's backyard back in the spring. So please do take a look at eferenzi.com. I have a starter kit in there. There's a little tab on that webpage that says starter kit. You've got some recommended books, and you've also got some a starter scenario and a lot more resources to keep going with your research.